we have a great personality with us who is known in the world for his research in the area of marketing. He has a PhD from Stern School, New York, which is one of the top business schools in the world. Post which he has worked in several business schools, which include Simon School in Rochester University, Johnson School in Cornell, Kelly in Indiana, and finally settled down in Foster's at Utah. And he's been there for a long time. He really specializes and is well known in the world uh, on marketing areas, and he has been also visiting some of the Indian institutes like IIM Ahmedabad and Bret School of Management, Bombay, uh, and is an acclaimed researcher and faculty in the area of marketing. Incidentally, he happens to be also an M.B.A, those days PGGM from IIM Ahmedabad, several years before me. And therefore, he's my senior from IIM Ahmedabad. And that's a brief introduction for someone who does not really need introduction. And that's Professor Shailendra Pratap Jain.
Thank you, Prashant.
Welcome, Shelly, and he's popularly known as Shelly. And welcome, Shelly, to the show. And thank you very much for sparing time to talk to our audience. And I'm sure the audience are going to greatly benefit from your knowledge and wisdom.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really, really happy and honored. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. So, starting with a question that you started working in the advertising industry after IIM Ahmedabad, and then how did you think of moving to US? How did you think of doing a PhD after several years of working?
Thank you for asking this question, and thank you again for having me in this forum. So straight out of IIM, I first worked with a company called McDowell, which was a liquor company, a part of United Breweries Group, and I got some grounding in brand management and sales in the 1 year that I spent there. In my summer internship during IIM after the first year was in an advertising agency. And I had quite enjoyed advertising, so I joined advertising after that 1 year in McDowell. I spent 5 years in advertising, 2 years at an agency called Ulka and 3 years at an agency called Mudra. And truth be told, I had a great time. I learned a truckload about marketing, about consumers, about retail, pricing, all the concepts that we learned in IIM. However, I was really burning out, to be perfectly honest. Advertising can be a real adrenaline rush kind of a profession. And I think I was working very hard, which is good, but I was pretty much, probably burning out. So in 1989, Mudra sent me to the US on an exchange program with our US affiliate called DDB Needham Worldwide. And I had no plans to come to the US up until then. I traveled to Chicago and New York at DDB Needham's offices, and I was exposed to the quote unquote, the American style of working. And I was also exposed to the cities, the big cities in the United States. And I traveled to a few cities as part of my 2 months in the United States. And there was no plan to move to the US, but I sort of kind of liked what I saw. And it was not just the material, fortune that United States had, which I saw, but it was also the quality of life, the manner in which people worked with each other, the independence, the freedom of choice. And I thought they were really interesting and exciting. That's when I started exploring the idea of moving to the US. And the legitimate way, the way to come here was to apply for a PhD. Now, specific to a PhD, I was, again, honestly, I had no clue what a PhD is all about. I knew you become a professor after a PhD, but outside of that, I was not really very well informed or versed. So I checked on a few schools. I liked New York a lot. I had heard about New York University. I applied literally to 3 schools in this entire country. And I was very fortunate. I had 2 of my cohort mates. One was at NYU finishing her PhD, and one was at Cornell doing his PhD. I spoke to them. They advised me, they guided me, and NYU gave me admission. That's how I came to the United States, and I got into NYU at the Stern School of Business. It just so happened that an ad campaign that I had worked on in Mudra it was called a comparative advertising. And one of the faculty members at NYU was an expert in comparative advertising. So he called me when he read my CV and he read my application where I had stated that I had worked on a comparative ad campaign, and he was interested. So I think that connection also helped in me getting admission to NYU. Long answer to your question.
Yeah, that's just so nice. No, very, very nice and educative. Right? How things can change with experience and exposure.
Yeah, yeah.
So, having seen India, having seen US, having seen New York, having seen Seattle, uh, having worked with multicultural uh, professors, peers, and students, what do you think are the key cultural differences between Asia and North America?
Yeah. So, there is a theory which is called cultural orientation theory. It was proposed several decades back by a researcher called Hofstede. And he proposed that cultures differ on 5 dimensions. And I think I'm sharing this because I believe there is some traction to that theory in answer to your question. So Asian cultures have traditionally been classified as what he called collectivistic cultures. And the Western cultures, United States in particular, he classified as individualistic cultures. This term, individualism, collectivism, has morphed over the years, but the essence of this term is in the definition of individualism and in the definition of collectivism. And I have observed those, definitional playouts in both these countries. But there is change happening. In India, there's a lot of change. In the United States, there's a lot of change. So I'm not treating these 2 countries as static. So with that caveat, India is considered to be more of it's about us kind of a culture. It's not about me, it's about us. While the United States is more about it's about me kind of culture. So it's not about selfish versus selfless. That's really not where I'm going. But children in the United States are raised to be independent. So when they go to school, when they go to college, of course, they maintain their connection with their parents and family, but they're pretty much on their own. They figure out how things work, they make their own lives, they have their own dreams, goals, desires. So it's about me, my goals, my choices, my preferences. In India, and I'm saying this in an endearing way, we are joined at the hip with our family and with our relatives, with our siblings. And that connection does not go away easily. We are influenced by their choices. We are influenced by the social norms a lot more. We are guided by the frameworks which we have grown up with, which is be a part of family. It's about family and so on and so forth. So I think that is the key difference which I have observed in these 2 countries from a human viewpoint, how human beings think and behave and make choices and pursue their goals. Which does not mean that I'm stereotyping Asia and I'm stereotyping United States. Probably there is an element of that. But broadly, you will probably see these individualism, collectivism ideas play out in these 2 countries. Again, as I said, change is taking place. Within the same country, you will find people who are individualists as well as collectivists. In India, likewise, you will find collectivists as well as individualists. But broadly, I have seen this difference in these 2 countries. And I think there is, at least in my experience, I'm confident that there is some traction to this theory. Another aspect of Hofstede's theory relates to what he calls power distance. And power distance, the idea of power distance is as follows. Some societies tend to be more hierarchical in terms of power distribution and belief that this hierarchy is appropriate and that's how society should work. In other societies, power differential might be there, but the fundamental belief is that we are a flat society. Power is more for decision making rather than influencing and controlling people's lives. So I think the Indian culture, the Asian cultures, many of them show this notion of high power distance belief, which means people are at the top of the hierarchy, middle of the hierarchy, and the bottom of the hierarchy, and information resources are mostly controlled at the top, which are meted out to those in the middle and the lower levels. In the low power distance belief cultures like United States, there may be some power differentials, but the belief is that it's about my own choices and I can make a huge difference. I don't have to rely as much on so-called people at the top of the food chain. I think these are the two things that I have observed in the context that you're talking about how people are different fundamentally. There are some similarities, as we know. We are all human beings. We have fundamentally the same needs, we want, if you believe in the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think that something is to be said about that. And I find human beings are very similar in different parts of the world, depending on how you relate to them.
Now, that's wonderful. Addendum to this question is that having been researching consumer behavior for last maybe 30 years, what are the differences that you've observed across Gen X, Gen Y, that is millennials, and Gen Z?
So it's interesting that you're raising this. I haven't really studied at a research level generational differences very deeply. I have one paper which is right now under review, in which we show that the generations differ in the extent to which they depend on nostalgia. And intuitively, it makes sense, right? So the younger generation is not driven by nostalgia as much. And the reason is presumably because they don't have a large enough bank account of memories where they can invoke nostalgia and make choices from a consumer's perspective. The older generation, on the other hand, they have years and years and years of life experiences and events in their lives. They've seen a lot more of the world, not in a superior, inferior way, but that's just the number of years they've spent on the planet. So they have an inventory of nostalgic experiences and memories which evoke nostalgia. So the older generation relies a lot more on nostalgia and making choices in terms of products and services. Younger generation does not rely on nostalgia that much. And in today's context, I think it's an obvious difference. Reliance on technology, you can clearly see how the world is changing based on technological developments. The older generation is much less in touch with the technology, and the younger generation, most of them, again, I'm generalizing, they thrive on technology as an enabler, sometimes as a pacifier, sometimes as an enabler. The third difference that I have an intuition about, and I do not have research data to support this, but my intuition is that the younger generation is experiencing, sadly, a lot more challenges from a mental health viewpoint. And that could be stemming from the effects of social media. It could be stemming from the general sense of loneliness because they're not connected as much human to human. I don't know the precise drivers of this effect. But the older generation, I think, and again, there are segments that are more challenged versus less challenged, but overall, my sense is that the older generation is not dealing with the same mental health challenges that the younger generation is. Somewhere I read that at least in the US, the younger generation is dealing with, there are 40 to 50% of this segment which is dealing with depression and anxiety. And it's possible that we are learning about depression and anxiety, and therefore we can identify more precisely who's dealing with these problems versus who's not. And that could explain why we are identifying more and more people with these problems. It is also possible that these problems are appearing because of the nature of the world that we are living in. There is so much uncertainty. There is so much, you might have heard of cancel culture. You might have heard of, there is so much, it's so easy for people to get triggered, and there's so much anger and rage that I experience in the world today across different countries. So for the younger generation, it's a very confusing time, and the opportunities are very different for this particular group of consumers.
This is fantastic analysis and fantastic insight. You have been also recently writing a book, right? What is this book about, and what are the key learnings from the book?
So this book is about what is called a phenomena which is called brand transgression. So a brand transgression is a situation where a brand, either volitionally or without its fault, commits something which some stakeholders perceive to be not good. So to give you some examples, some real transgressions where the company was finally found to be at fault is Volkswagen. Volkswagen had the Dieselgate scandal, where they had inserted software to underreport emissions, and they were found to be guilty of doing that volitionally. So that's a real transgression, so to speak. And then there is the case of Boeing MAX 737 crashes in 2018 and 19. So there, in that particular case, the brand Boeing really struggled to emerge from it for some years. Then there are situations where the brand may not be responsible for the challenge it is facing perceptually in the marketplace. Tylenol in the 1980s was some bottles of Tylenol were found to be spiked with cyanide, and 7 consumers died from consuming those cyanide spiked Tylenol capsules. And the case study that we report in the book finds that the company was completely not at fault. They did a very thorough audit of the production, manufacturing, marketing, the whole 9 yards they went through, and there was nowhere that they could find any fault in their production or capabilities. So some troublemaker apparently was, responsible for this, and that troublemaker has not been identified. So these are called brand transgressions, whether it's of your own creation or it's not of your own creation. So that is the focus of the book. And what we do in this book, Prashant, is to, we have reported about, I think, 25 to 30 case studies. And we've done, I think, a fair amount of research to make sure that we are not making opinionated judgments or conclusions. We base it on research. And we lay out a roadmap for managers who potentially are in a situation where the brand is perceived to have transgressed and they don't know what to do. How do you come out of that situation? So we have got what we call the 8 principles of brand transformation based on these case studies. And so another case study that we talk about. So we don't only cover case studies of brands going bad. We also cover case studies of brands doing well in the face of transgressions. So we cover the case of Starbucks. Starbucks was in some problem a couple of years back, 3-4 years back, when one of its stores, one of the baristas in the store did not treat 2 consumers respectfully, which became a nightmare for Starbucks. And so we cover how Starbucks addressed that situation really swiftly, rapidly, humanistically, to the point where the company came out stronger rather than weaker from that transgression. We also cover a case in India, which is that of Cadbury's. Cadbury's was some bars of Cadbury's were found to have worms in them, and the company suffered for a few months until the company decided to address the problem. So we cover these case studies where we show how some companies which did not address these transgressive situations faced some really bad consequences. On the other hand, some companies which were either very strongly and positively reactive or proactive suffered fewer consequences or less damaging consequences. So that's what the book is about.
That's really fantastic. That's really fantastic. And I'm sure that it would be a great read, and people will benefit a lot by reading it. When is it likely to be on the stands?
So I think the release date is April 28th, 2024. And it is being published by a German publisher called De Gruyter, and the co-author, Shalini Jain. She happens to be my wife, but she does work in business ethics and corporate social responsibility. That's her research areas. I work in brand and consumers. She works in ethics and CSR. So we bring our, perspectives together. And we think it's an interesting book. It's worth reading. But of course, we are obviously biased.
Oh, it's certainly worth reading, and it's certainly something to learn from. Mm-hmm. So, what do you think? How do you think the coming generations of marketing or consumer preferences or the human race itself will change or not change in next 20 years?
That is, I don't have a good answer to your question. I can speculate like many people do, and I don't have the roadmap in front of me. My guess is that all of us are trying to find an answer to that question. And as horrible as it may sound, my guess is we don't know the answer. What we do see happening here and now is a warp speed transition to dependence on technology like never before. So internet now is, a thing of the past. Internet is almost like, what are we talking about? Like 30 years back, it's here and gone kind of thing. Today we are talking about very advanced technological developments, which is one of them is generative AI, which I think will be a huge player in our lives. Not in 2-3 years, but probably even sooner. Already generative AI is at work. You might have heard of Sora in India, which is basically a generative AI-based way of creating moving visuals, videos and so on and so forth. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg. I was talking to a friend of mine who is, I think, much more informed than I am in terms of the future. And from a corporation perspective, from a company perspective, his belief is that 60 to 70% of the work that human beings are doing today, and I know this sounds gloomy, but I will try to give the other side as well. 60 to 70% of the work that human beings are doing today will be done by using generative AI. And of course, human beings will very much be making the big decisions, strategic decisions. So the 30 to 40% will still be in the hands of human beings, but generative AI will take over a lot of the work that human beings are doing now. Having said that, just like we felt threatened when computers came, we felt threatened when internet came. I guess it's very common and it's very well researched that change is threatening. And very few of us welcome change with open arms, saying, here is an opportunity. Most of us look at it as a threat. But being human beings, we are adaptable. We have adapted over centuries, of thousands of years of our evolution. And my hope and guess is that we will adapt. So our skill levels will change. We will learn new things. We will learn new technologies. And we will create new opportunities for ourselves, which will create happiness for us. So yes, some things will be challenging, I would imagine, as many of us expect, that some jobs will not be there, but I think other jobs will be created. I'm quite certain of that. The other positive side is that all this change is happening At the same time, there are a lot of people who are thinking about this and trying to insert policy frameworks so that there is lower cost to humanity. I know that some of these big tech firms and some of the country governments are planning to get together and decide on what should be the framework which should guide the future of business, the future of our lives, and so on and so forth. So yeah, we for some of us it's doomsday. I don't think it's doomsday. I think it's more change which threatens, and that's really the mindset which is at play. It'll sort out in another 2 or 3 years. We will see where things are going, and it'll settle down. I really believe it'll settle down. So that's one change that is happening. What is the other change that I can talk about? From stemming from this change, you can probably see, another change that is happening is that human relationships, from a very clinical perspective, human beings are not relating to each other socially as much as we used to. So the social fabric is changing. And I think that's also stemming from COVID, partly COVID, that gave us a new way to look at our lives, and our lifestyle changed. Partly it's because of how AI is playing into our needs and preferences. Basically, I'm referring to robotics. And we are expecting robots to start taking care of many, many functions that human beings used to perform. And so far, I believe we do not have a situation where robots are sentient. They still need programming, they still need control from human beings. They don't have feelings so far, but technology is exploring those options. And once that barrier is crossed, I would imagine that human beings will have robots as their social partners, not just in business, not just in household work, but even in potentially intimacy and romantic situations, as we are talking about. So we are going to look at a very different landscape in a few years to come. That's my limited, probably very inaccurate vision of the future, for what it's worth.
Now, this is fantastic analysis of various scenarios that can pan out in future, which should guide the CEOs and the CXOs in thinking and planning for the future of their businesses over the next 20 years, which is extremely important. And I must confess that a few years ago, I thought that the amount of change that we have seen, our generation has seen, from non-internet days, when to find a fact we had to go to 5 libraries and scan through various library cards or the index boxes or index cards, which most of the younger generation today does not understand what is an index card. And what we would take 5 days to find out, today Google tells us in less than 5 minutes. And similar other changes that we've seen, which has changed the life, the way the younger generation thinks, and the social fabric. And I was thinking that what more can change? And how much more can change? And then comes AI. And then we thought that, this is a lot of brouhaha about AI, but true AI will take maybe 30 years, 40 years, 50 years to come in. So it's way, way, way off in terms of the time horizon to even think about it, and it's more a media hype. And then comes the AI chatbot and generative AI and all that, and we realize that it's already real.
Yep.
And the change that we're going to see in next 20 years is going to be way more and way higher than what we have seen in the last 30 years.
Absolutely.
So that was humbling, and that was a new realization that I also had,
Mhm.
which I think helps us to plan our lives, plan our future, plan our businesses better
Mhm.
in a more informed fashion.
I agree. I agree. Thank you for sharing that. You know, just one more, if I may just chime in with one
Yeah.
more recent learning. It's recent in the field of business. So there's something called a digital twin. In essence, what a digital twin is a simulation of what exists in the real world. So a digital twin could be that of a factory, it could be that of an aeroplane, it could be that of a whole city. A digital twin could be that of a spaceship. A digital twin could be that of a human being. So digital twin idea has been there for a very, very long time. But now businesses have started understanding the power of simulating the real world without having to test their ideas in the real world. So it's very simple to understand, but we have the technology to do that, where we can simulate a city and plan out traffic movement sitting in an office on a computer. I recently was talking to a friend of mine who was talking of the idea of a digital twin of customers. So imagine you're a customer, and I'm a consumer psychologist, so it's of interest to me. And today, when we browse, there are so many footprints that we leave behind, right? There's so much data. We call trillions of terabytes of data, right? So everything that we do on the internet and social and so on and so forth is being recorded somewhere, is being inventoried. And there are companies that are collecting that data and mining it. So the digital twin of a customer is going to play out as follows. That data is going to be used to create the twin of a customer in the digital lab. And as the customer keeps creating more and more data, the data will be updated, will be fed to the digital twin. So the companies who create this digital twin model will be able to predict with an extreme level of accuracy how the consumer will respond to specific levers that the company moves. For instance, if the company was to launch a promotion, if the company was to launch a new packaging, the company was launch an advertising campaign or its product formulation or whatever it is, they can see the change, or how the consumer will respond in the lab without having to go test market, so to speak. And it's going to be dynamic. It's going to give a lot of information and I think power to the companies that are able to tap into this. So this is another way generative AI is going to be helping corporations.
This is wonderful, wonderful insight. Thank you very much for this insight.
Mhm.
And
Thank you.
what would be your advice to young students, young professionals who have 20, 30, 40 years of working life left? What should they do similarly or differently going forward to stay employable?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I try to do. I'm looking at another few years in my academic life, and I also get threatened by change. And but I have learned over whatever number of years I've been working that change is the only thing that is to be expected. Shakyamuni, Gautam Buddha said, change is
Change
the
is the
only
only
thing,
constant.
is the only constant, right? That's exactly what I'm referring to. So as hard as it is, becoming a change oriented person is going to be a key driver of whether you become happy in the next 20, 30, 40 years or you struggle. So becoming change oriented is one thing. Welcoming change is another. By welcoming change, I mean constantly upgrading your skills, constantly looking at opportunities where you're forced to upgrade your skills if that's where it has to go. So my own little example, I started out of my PhD program as running psychological experiments, which is what I learned as a methodology to test my consumer behavior theories. Over time, I have moved to other areas methodologically as well as theoretically, because what I see is if I don't, then the classic statement is I'm going to become a dinosaur. So I think that change orientation is going to be critical. The other thing I will really encourage, not just younger generation, but even people in our generation, is to be sensitive to our mental health, because the change is rampant, and with change comes uncertainty. And with uncertainty, for many of us, will come anxiety and sometimes a sense that we are paralyzed. We don't know what to do. We are in a situation where we have what we have never dealt with before. So it's important to, have a sense, okay, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling uncertain, and try to get some help, try to get some support. How do I deal with this situation? How do I break through? In many countries, even today, physical health is taken as, of course, if you have a stomach problem, you go to the doctor. If you have a more serious physical disease, you get treatment for it, you get surgery. But mental health is seen as, oh, don't worry about it. People who are crazy have mental health. I think that stereotype should break. It's very important for us to seek help, even for mental health situations. And that's another, and I'm saying from personal experience, I seek counseling. I've been seeking counseling for the last 12 years, almost 12 years, and I seek counseling regularly. And it has been tremendously, tremendously helpful for me in understanding my behaviors, my triggers. Why do I feel anxious? Why do I feel depressed? Why do I feel hopeless? And so on and so forth. And my counselors give me handle. They give me a sense, how do I break through those situations? So I think those are important for people, because I see the world becoming more and more dependent on mechanisms which we have never seen before. Loneliness will be rampant. Our ability to interact with human beings will probably go down to some extent. And we will not know what to do with confusing emotions that we are experiencing. So those are the two things I will really encourage people to think about. And the most important weapon, the most important treasure, which I have tried to keep all my life, or at least much of my life, I struggle with it, but I still try, is to never, ever lose hope. Alexander, the great King Alexander, he said, hope is the biggest treasure. And my mentor, who passed away last year, Daisaku Ikeda, also shared these words of Alexander the Great. Hope is the biggest treasure. So no matter how challenging times become, how difficult things are, it's important to never lose hope. And it'll be hard at times, but get help, pick yourself up. And sometimes you have to create hope when you don't have hope. Force yourself into looking at what are the positives in my life? What do I need to be grateful about? There is so many things we have to be grateful about. It's easy to go into a swamp of darkness and hopelessness. It's very, very easy if we allow ourselves to go there. So that's what I'd like to share.
Thank you very much. This is a great advice, not just for youngsters, but for us also. And this talk has been really, really helpful and invigorating for me, and I'm sure it will be similar experience for all of those who will be watching this video. And I think this was a wonderful 35-40 minutes that we could have with you. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for your time and your wisdom and your advice. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you again. Very humble to be here, and good luck to you. Thank you.